Imagine setting sail on a luxurious cruise, thinking it's just a vacation, but the ship has other plans. Passengers vanish without a trace. Eerie music drifts from locked halls, and shadows seem to move on their own. Every story you're about to hear has been carefully researched and rechecked, pulled from true encounters shared on Reddit and verified reports. This isn't fiction. This is what really happened to ordinary people on the high seas. So dim the lights, grab your headphones, and hold on tight. Don't forget to subscribe to Midnight Outcry, hit the bell icon, and drop a comment below, because the ship never forgets its passengers, and neither should you. Story 1. They said the ship had been fully booked, every cabin accounted for, every passenger checked in, every wristband scanned at embarkation. But the first time I saw the woman in the red dress, she was standing at the end of a corridor where no stateroom existed. My name is Jacob Whitmore. I'm 38 years old, and I work as a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon. This cruise wasn't really my idea. My younger sister Claire practically forced me to join after a messy divorce I'd gone through the year before. She said I needed a change of scenery. I'm not much of a drinker, not exactly a social butterfly, and certainly not the kind of guy who signs up for karaoke nights. But she bought the ticket, and she made me promise I'd at least try to enjoy myself. I boarded the ship expecting boredom mixed with awkward social interactions. But from the first night, something felt off. I remember walking back to my cabin after dinner. The hall was narrow, the kind where the carpet muffled every footstep, and the overhead lights hummed faintly, like dying bees. That's when I saw her. A woman in a crimson evening gown, standing so still at the far end of the corridor, her head tilted slightly, as if she was listening for something I couldn't hear. Her dark hair hung straight down, her hands clasped in front of her, unmoving. I blinked, and she was gone. I laughed nervously to myself, chalking it up to exhaustion. But when I reached the end of the hallway, I realized there was nothing there. No door, no access panel, no service hatch. Just blank wall where she had been standing. The next morning at breakfast, I told Claire about it. She teased me for already imagining ghosts, but when I described the exact dress and posture, her smile faltered. She claimed she'd seen someone similar during embarkation, a woman who didn't go through security, just walked past the line as if nobody else noticed. I wanted to shrug it off, but something about the way Claire lowered her voice unsettled me. She wasn't joking anymore. Later that day, curiosity got the better of me. I went to the guest services desk and casually asked if there was a themed party or formal event scheduled the night before. The woman behind the counter smiled politely and shook her head. When I pressed further and asked if there had been a passenger in a red dress, she glanced down at her monitor and scrolled through the manifest. After a pause, she said, "I'm sorry, sir. There's no one matching that description aboard." That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. That night, as I lay in my cabin, I heard faint footsteps outside my door. Not hurried, not casual, slow, deliberate, almost dragging. I opened the door, but the corridor was empty. Still, the faint smell of sea air lingered, as if someone had been standing right there. I tried to laugh it off again, but my laughter sounded hollow in that narrow space. By the third night, things escalated. Claire and I were coming back from one of the lounges when we both saw her at the far end of another hallway. Same crimson dress, same rigid stance. Only this time, Claire grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt. "You see her too, right?" she whispered. We both watched as the woman turned her head toward us, her face pale and expressionless under the artificial light. A second later, the corridor lights flickered, and she was gone. But this time, we both knew she'd been real. By the fourth night of the cruise, I couldn't deny it anymore. Whoever she wasn't just a trick of my tired mind. Claire and I kept our voices low whenever we spoke of her, almost like children whispering about the boogeyman, afraid she might hear. I started paying attention to the layout of the ship. Every corridor, every staircase, every deck level. It all began to blur together. Identical patterns of carpet and steel doors, Yet whenever the woman appeared, it was in spots that shouldn't exist. A dead-end corridor, a wall with no cabin numbers. Once, near the laundry access, where guests weren't even supposed to be, Claire insisted we go to the front desk together. I remember the young man behind the counter. His name tag said Elliot. I described what we saw, and his forced smile faltered when Claire backed me up. He hesitated before saying, "We've received comments before." Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Sir, officially there is no such passenger. Unofficially," he trailed off, glancing at the other staff member nearby. Then, without finishing, he excused himself to the back office and didn't return. That was when I knew we were in over our heads. The next night, the ballroom had live music, and Claire convinced me to join. It was supposed to distract us. Drinks were flowing, the band was swinging, couples twirled across the floor under warm golden light. For a few minutes, I let myself relax. Until I saw her. She was on the opposite balcony, overlooking the dance floor. Her crimson dress caught the light like it had been made from molten glass. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't clap along to the music. She just stared down at us. I squeezed Claire's wrist, and when she followed my gaze, her face drained of color. "Jake," she whispered, "she's not clapping." It was such a small, absurd observation, but she was right. Everyone around her moved naturally, reacting to the music, the laughter. But this woman, she was frozen in time. Then the strangest thing happened. For the briefest second, I swear she looked directly at me. Not in a vague sense, not like when you convince yourself someone across a room might be glancing your way. Her head turned, and her eyes locked to mine with pinpoint precision, like she'd been waiting for me to notice. And then she was gone. Claire wanted to leave immediately, but I forced myself to stay, pretending to sip at my drink. My hands were trembling. The band played on, oblivious. I started noticing other details too. In the dining hall the next morning, a couple from New Jersey we'd sat with earlier in the cruise never reappeared. Their table sat empty, half-eaten fruit still on their plates. When I asked our server about them, she blinked like she didn't understand who I meant. "We only seat full tables," she said stiffly, and walked away. Later, while pacing the observation deck alone, I overheard two crew members muttering near the railings. I caught only fragments. "Manifest doesn't match," and Captain said not to speak of it. The moment they noticed me, their voices dropped to silence. That night, the footsteps outside my cabin returned. This time louder. Closer. I heard knuckles brushing against the door, a slow drag of fingernails across the wood. My skin prickled. I pressed my ear to the door and froze. Someone was breathing on the other side. But when I pulled the door open, the hallway was deserted. I don't know why I did it, but I whispered out loud, "What do you want?" The air smelled faintly of salt water. Back inside, I grabbed my phone and began recording notes, trying to document everything as if it would somehow protect me. My voice shook, but I forced myself to speak. If anyone listens to this later, please just know we weren't imagining her. She's real. And if you're hearing this on Midnight Outcry, take 2 seconds to subscribe. It helps keep stories like this alive. I paused after saying it, realizing how insane I must have sounded. But at that point, sanity was slipping through my fingers like sand. The woman wasn't on the manifest, but she was on this ship, and she was watching us. By the 5th day, the ship felt wrong in ways I couldn't fully explain. Claire said it too. How the corridor seemed longer, how sometimes the elevator took us to floors that didn't match the deck maps. Little things we'd have shrugged off earlier now felt like deliberate traps. We tried to find Elliot again, the desk clerk who had half warned us. But the woman at the counter said there was no Elliot assigned to guest services. When we pressed, she smiled too broadly, almost rehearsed, and repeated the same line, "Maybe you misread the name." Her tone made it sound like an accusation. That night, everything broke. It was just after midnight when the overhead PA system crackled to life, static at first, then a calm male voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, We invite you to enjoy a complimentary midnight reception in the main ballroom. Cocktails, hors d'oeuvre, and live entertainment await. I remember sitting upright in bed, staring at the ceiling speaker, because something about the voice sounded wrong. Slightly slowed, slightly warped, as if played from an old cassette. Claire sat up too. "Jake, the ballroom was closed after 10. They told us that." And yet we could hear faint music drifting down the hall. We weren't the only ones curious. From our cabin door, we watched groups of passengers shuffle toward the ballroom, dressed in robes or pajamas, muttering about free drinks. Their faces looked dazed, almost hypnotized. I wanted to stop them, to shout, but something froze my voice. Claire squeezed my arm hard enough to leave a mark, whispering, "Don't." One couple actually turned to wave at us. "You're missing it," the man said cheerfully. His wife giggled, her eyes unfocused. They disappeared into the ballroom doors. But here's the thing, the ballroom doors never opened. We saw them walk straight toward the closed, locked entrance. For a split second, the doors shimmered, as if heat rippled through the air, and then they were gone. The music grew louder. Glasses clinked. A woman's laugh echoed from inside, but it was distorted, like hearing it underwater. Claire and I bolted. We spent the next hour on the outer decks, breathing sea air like it was the only thing keeping us sane. When we finally returned, the hall was silent, ballroom doors sealed as before. Not a single passenger came back out. The next morning, their cabins were stripped bare. Sheets folded, suitcases gone, names erased from the daily activity lists. Even the electronic room keys no longer worked. It was as though they had never been booked at all. I confronted a steward cleaning the hallway. "Where are the people in 402 and 404? They went into the ballroom last night." He stared at me with a blank politeness that chilled me more than anger would have. "Those cabins were never occupied, sir." When I turned, Claire was already crying quietly, shaking her head. That afternoon, while pacing the ship, I caught my reflection in one of the tinted windows lining Deck 7. At first, it looked normal, me tired, hollow-eyed. Then my reflection blinked a fraction out of sync. Just one beat late. And in the background of that glass, behind me, was the crimson dress. I spun around. Empty hall. My legs went weak. That was the last normal moment I would ever have on that ship. That night, Claire and I decided we couldn't just sit and wait. We had to know what was happening on this ship. We waited until the corridors fell quiet, then slipped out of our cabin with nothing but a flashlight and our keycards. The air in the hall was heavy, warmer than it should have been, like the ventilation had cut off. We made our way to the service corridors, the ones passengers weren't supposed to access. I'd noticed a steward disappear behind a gray steel door earlier that day, so I tested it. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. Inside, the walls were narrower, the lighting harsh and buzzing. We crept past laundry carts, crates of supplies, even stacks of folded linens. But what stopped me cold were the rows of old suitcases shoved against one wall. Dozens of them. Tags still attached. Passengers, names. Some of those names matched the ones I had seen on the deleted activity lists. Claire whispered, "Oh my God, Jake, these are theirs. These are the ones who never came back." I wanted to leave right then, but something pulled me further down that hallway. A low hum, like an engine, but layered with voices. Not normal voices, drawn-out murmurs, all overlapping. We followed the sound until we reached a locked bulkhead door with a small wired glass window. My breath fogged the glass when I leaned in. The ballroom was on the other side. Except it wasn't a ballroom anymore. I saw the same passengers who'd vanished. Their bodies were there, arranged in stiff lines, heads bowed as if in prayer. The air shimmered above them, and their faces flickered, alive one moment, then pale, hollow-eyed shells the next. At the far end of the room, standing like a conductor in front of a silent orchestra, was the woman in the crimson dress. Her head snapped up. I swear her gaze locked directly onto me through the glass. I stumbled back so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. She saw me. I whispered, my throat dry. Claire grabbed my hand. "We need to run now." But when we turned, the corridor behind us wasn't empty anymore. 3 crew members stood there, uniforms crisp, smiles stretched too wide. Their eyes gleamed unnaturally, reflecting the fluorescent lights in a way human eyes shouldn't. One of them spoke, voice smooth and rehearsed, like the guest services clerk earlier. "Guests are not permitted in staff areas. Please return to your cabin." Every instinct screamed at me not to obey. I tightened my grip on Claire's hand. "Run!" We shoved past them, bolting down the service corridor. The men didn't chase immediately, but their footsteps soon echoed behind us, steady and deliberate, like they knew we couldn't escape far. We burst back onto the passenger deck, gasping. But the halls weren't the same. The lighting had dimmed to a sickly yellow, and the patterned carpet looked wet, soggy, as though soaked in seawater. With each step, I heard squelches beneath my shoes. Claire's voice shook. "Jake, the ship's changing." And she was right. Every corner we turned stretched longer, ceilings dipping lower, as if the corridors themselves were warping to keep us inside. We finally reached our cabin, slamming the door and shoving a chair against it. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the flashlight twice. The entire night, we listened. Soft knocks at the door, the sound of faint music rising from the ballroom below, and once, a whisper through the air vent. It wasn't Claire's voice. And it wasn't mine. It said my name. That was when I realized we weren't just passengers anymore. We were being counted. Sleep never came. The knocking at the door continued until dawn, though every time I looked through the peephole, no one stood there. Just an empty hallway stretching unnaturally long, the walls rippling faintly like the surface of water. By morning, I told Claire we had to act like nothing happened. Blend in. Pretend we didn't see the ballroom or the suitcases. Pretend we weren't on their list. But when we tried to order breakfast, the waiter set 2 plates in front of us with a smile I'll never forget. Pancakes for me. Scrambled eggs for Claire. Except when I cut into the pancake, it wasn't food. It bled, a deep crimson seeping into the plate. Claire's fork clattered to the floor as her eggs twitched, writhing like living things. Every passenger around us was still eating like nothing was wrong. Chewing, laughing, talking. Not a single person seemed to notice. We left immediately, and that's when I knew we couldn't make it through the rest of this cruise. We had to get off this ship, no matter how impossible it seemed. That night, we tried again to find the ballroom. I thought maybe if we could catch it in daylight, it would just be a room again. But the steel door was gone. Just smooth bulkhead, no handle, no seams. Like it never existed. Claire broke down crying in the hall, her voice a desperate whisper. "Jake, they're going to take us." Just like the others. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't even lie anymore. She was right. The turning point came on the 4th night. Another announcement chimed through the intercom system. The same cheerful, polished voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the grand ballroom for tonight's gala celebration." The words hit me like ice water. There was no grand ballroom open to passengers, but every door on the deck slid open in unison, and I watched as dozens of guests stepped into the hall, smiling like puppets being guided by invisible strings. Claire clutched my arm. Don't follow them." But I realized something. If we didn't go, they'd notice. We'd stand out, and the crew already knew we'd seen too much. So we joined the flow of bodies. The elevator dinged, its panel glowing with a number that shouldn't exist. 13. My legs locked, but the crowd pressed us forward, forcing us inside. The ride was long, far longer than any elevator ride should take. The floor shook beneath our feet, the air turned colder, and the people around us began humming. All at once, the same low, droning tune. When the doors finally opened, it wasn't any deck I'd seen before. The ballroom was real. Chandeliers glowed above a massive room. Tables overflowed with silver platters and crystal glasses filled with wine so dark it looked black. Music floated through the air, but there was no band, no speakers, just sound without a source. The woman in the crimson dress glided across the floor, her smile widening when she saw me. "Welcome, Jake," she said softly, though her lips never moved. "We've been waiting." Claire squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Her voice trembled. "Don't let go." I tried not to. But the crowd moved around us, separating us with frightening ease, like waves pulling us apart in a tide. I shouted her name, but my voice drowned in the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the woman's hand brushing my cheek, colder than ice. When I woke up, I wasn't in my cabin. I was in a lounge chair, facing the ocean, as if nothing had happened. Crew members bustled around. Passengers strolled the deck. Everything back to normal, but Claire was gone. I went to the purser's desk, demanding they check the manifest. The clerk typed, glanced at the screen, and gave me the same polite, unblinking smile. "There's no record of any guest named Claire traveling with us, sir. Perhaps you boarded alone." I slammed my fist on the counter. "That's impossible. She was right here." "She was with me." The clerk just tilted his head slightly. "Are you feeling unwell?" I staggered back. People walked past me, but no one looked at me directly anymore. Their eyes slid over me like I wasn't there. That's when it hit me. I wasn't on the manifest either. And this ship, it doesn't just take passengers, it erases them. So if you ever hear an announcement for a gala in the grand ballroom, don't go. Don't even listen. Because if you do, you'll never make it back to your room. Story 2. You don't realize how fragile your sense of safety is until you're miles out in the open ocean, surrounded by nothing but black water stretching in every direction. A cruise ship feels like a floating city, but in reality it's just steel and glass drifting over depths no one could survive. That thought used to feel thrilling to me. Now it feels like the beginning of a warning. My name is Daniel, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me on a cruise last year. I booked it after a breakup, thinking a week in the Caribbean would help clear my head. I'd been on ships before, but this was the first time I left one with the kind of nightmares that make you question if you should ever sleep again. The first odd thing happened before I even stepped on board. At the terminal, the woman at check-in scanned my boarding pass, frowned, and scanned it again. For a moment, she glanced at the coworker beside her like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. Then she smiled too quickly and waved me through. I remember asking if everything was okay, and she just said, "Yes, sir, enjoy your cruise." Her voice cracked at the end. I didn't think about it again until I went searching for my cabin. My ticket said C309. Easy enough. But when I reached Deck C, the hallway numbers went from 308 straight to 310. Number 309. No door. Just a blank stretch of wall, smooth and freshly painted. I stared, confused, until a crew member passed by. I asked him where 309 was, and for just a flicker of a second his expression dropped. Then he forced a professional smile. "You must be mistaken, sir. That number doesn't exist." I pulled out my pass to show him. But when I looked down, my stomach twisted. The number wasn't 309 anymore. It was printed as 310. I know what I saw. It had been 309. That night, when most passengers were at the theater, I walked that hallway again, and that's when I froze. Because where the blank wall had been, there was now a door. A cabin door. Brass numbers screwed in tight, 309. My key card shouldn't have worked, but when I slid it through, the lock gave a soft green click. The cabin inside wasn't like the one I'd been assigned. There was no suitcase, no cruise-branded pamphlets on the desk. Instead, the air was freezing cold and smelled faintly of mold, like a basement that had been sealed for years. Every piece of furniture was draped in dusty white sheets. I reached for the lamp, but something else caught my eye. Scratched into the wood panel above the bed, deep gouges that looked desperate. "Do not stay!" I stumbled back, pulse hammering in my ears. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. From somewhere in the dark corner of the room came the sound of breathing. Slow, heavy, not mine. I didn't wait to see who or what it was. I bolted, slamming the door shut and running down the corridor. When I dared to glance back, the door was gone again, Just a blank stretch of wall where it had been. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I was overtired, imagining things. But when I asked casually about the cabin numbers, every passenger, every staff member brushed me off. Until one bartender leaned close, lowered his voice and said, "Don't ask about that room. People who stay there don't come back." He looked like he wanted to say more, but someone called his name, and he walked away. I laughed nervously into my drink, but inside one thought kept repeating, cold and sharp. My name had been on that cabin, and I had already stepped inside. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time the ship rocked against the waves, I swore I could hear faint knocks traveling through the walls, as if someone in that missing cabin was trying to signal me. By morning, I'd convinced myself I needed answers. Rational answers. Cruise ships don't just have phantom rooms. Maybe it was storage. Maybe a maintenance space. Something logical. I went to guest services, standing in line between an elderly couple complaining about their dining reservations and a teenager locked out of his cabin. When it was finally my turn, I slid my key card across the counter. "Can you confirm my cabin assignment?" I asked. The woman typed briskly, then smiled. "You're in C-310, Mr. Hall. Everything okay?" I forced a nod. "Yeah, just thought there might have been a printing mistake." "No, sir. Cabin 309 doesn't exist." Her smile never faltered, but I noticed her hand gripping her pen too tightly, knuckles whitening. I started to press, but she leaned forward just slightly and whispered so only I could hear, "Don't ask about it again." The line behind me shuffled impatiently. I muttered thanks and walked away, feeling more unsettled than ever. That evening, I joined a trivia game in one of the lounges just to feel normal. It worked for a while. Bright lights, canned music, other passengers laughing over cocktails. But in the middle of a round, I caught sight of a man at the bar staring directly at me. He was pale, water dripping steadily down the collar of his shirt, though no one else seemed to notice. He lifted his glass, gave me a smile that was all teeth, and mouthed something I couldn't hear. I blinked, and he was gone. By the time I made it back to my cabin, my hands were trembling. I pulled the desk chair tight against the door, slid the balcony lock into place, and sat in silence. The only sound was the low mechanical hum of the engines deep beneath us. That's when I heard it. Thud, thud, thud. 3 knocks. Coming from the wall behind my bed. The exact spot where the missing 309 would have been. I pressed my ear against the panel. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, so faint I thought I imagined it, a man's voice whispered, "Let me out." I stumbled back, heart hammering. My phone nearly slipped from my grip, but I forced it on, recording a shaky video. Maybe, if I had proof, someone would believe me. I whispered into the camera, "If anyone sees this later, this cabin shouldn't exist. Something's inside it." Halfway through, I froze. The screen of my phone reflected not just me, but a figure standing behind me. Tall. Still. Its face blurry in the glass. I spun around. Nothing there. I knew I couldn't stay another night without answers. I decided to track down the bartender who had warned me. When I found him the next day, he refused to meet my eyes. But after I begged, he sighed and poured a drink he didn't charge me for. His voice was low, shaky. "There was a passenger in 309 last season, young guy, traveling alone. They found his room flooded floor to ceiling. No broken pipes, no leaks anywhere else. Just his room. They pulled him out, but..." He broke off, glancing over his shoulder. "Look, if you're smart, you'll stay out of there. Some doors aren't meant to open." I wanted to ask more, but before I could, another crew member appeared, clapping him on the shoulder and steering him away with forced cheer. He didn't look back at me once. That night, when the ship sailed into open water under a moonless sky, I couldn't resist. I walked the hall again. The wall was smooth, blank, no door. But I knew better now. I pressed my palm against the surface where 309 should have been, and the wall pressed back. I barely slept. Every creak of the ship, Every shuffle of footsteps in the hall made me jolt upright. But it wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something had crossed a line. By morning, I was determined to test reality. I pressed my phone against the wall where the door should have been and started recording. "This is C-310, I whispered, "and right here should be cabin 309. They say it doesn't exist, but—" My words cut off when the wall itself rippled, faint as heat waves on asphalt. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the phone. The footage confirmed it. For half a second, there was an outline of a handle, a door, and then nothing. Later that afternoon, as I passed one of the quiet corridors near the crew-only areas, I caught a whiff of something sharp, metallic, like rust or blood. The air was cooler there, unnaturally so. I rounded the corner and froze. A cabin steward, uniform crisp and pressed, was standing at a door, polishing the brass numbers with slow, deliberate strokes. My eyes locked on the plaque, 309. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, the steward was gone. The plaque gone too. Only smooth, blank wall. The hair on my neck prickled. I wasn't imagining this. That night, I woke up to the sound of rushing water. At first, I thought it was the bathroom sink left on. But when I swung my legs off the bed, the carpet was wet, ice cold. Panic surged through me. I yanked open the bathroom door. Dry. No leaks. The water seemed to seep directly out of the floor itself, spreading outward like veins. And then I heard it again. "Let me out." This time louder. Closer. I backed toward the balcony, but the sliding door wouldn't budge. The lock jammed. The water licked around my ankles now, salty and foul, carrying with it the faint smell of decay. I grabbed the phone, fumbling for a signal. None. The screen flickered with static, then cut to black. When it lit up again, the reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. It was the man from the lounge. His eyes were wide, skin gray, lips blue from drowning. He mouthed the words again. "Let me out!" I screamed and hurled the phone across the room. The moment it hit the wall, everything stopped. The water was gone. The carpet was dry. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. Shaking, I forced myself out into the corridor. The hallway lights flickered, casting everything in brief flashes. I wasn't alone. At the far end stood a group of people, passengers maybe. Their clothes were wrong, outdated somehow, soaked and clinging to their frames. They stared at me without moving, and one by one they raised their hands and pointed. Not at me, at the wall where 309 should have been. I bolted, my footsteps echoing through the corridor. I didn't stop until I was back at the atrium where bright lights and living voices filled the air. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. But then I caught sight of the ship's daily schedule board. Scrolling across in cheerful lettering was a note I hadn't seen before. "Cabin 309 Memorial. Tonight at midnight. Guests welcome." I couldn't breathe. My chest felt heavy as I stared at the glowing letters on the schedule board. A memorial service for a cabin that supposedly didn't exist? My first thought was to run to the purser's desk, demand answers. But when I looked back, the lettering was gone. Like it had never been there. All day, I tried to distract myself. I ate, I walked the deck, I even forced small talk with strangers. But everywhere I went, I caught little signs. A waiter passing with a tray of drinks paused mid-step to whisper, "Don't go." A kid tugged on my sleeve in the elevator, staring past me at nothing, before her mother yanked her away. Even the musicians in the atrium, halfway through their song, the melody slipped into something mournful, out of place. By nightfall, curiosity and dread were tangled together in me so tightly I couldn't untangle them. Against my better judgment, I found myself walking the quiet corridor again, the one that always smelled faintly of salt water. The lights dimmed as the ship shifted, and then I heard voices, not in my head this time, but echoing from that wall. Laughter, clinking glasses, muffled music, a party. I pressed my ear to the spot where cabin 309 should have been. My pulse hammered. Clear as day I heard it. "Don't be late. Midnight buffet." The same words from the announcement. And then, without warning, my hand sank forward. The wall wasn't solid anymore. It was soft, like water. My fingers passed straight through. My whole arm. I yanked it back, gasping, dripping with ice-cold seawater. The skin of my hand was pale, wrinkled, like it had been submerged for hours. I stumbled backward, clutching it against my chest. The laughter on the other side grew louder, as though whoever, or whatever, was inside had noticed me. Suddenly, the corridor lights went out. In the pitch dark, a single door appeared ahead, glowing faintly with golden trim. 309. It was real. The knob turned from the inside. Every instinct screamed to run. But my legs locked in place. A line of cold water slid across my shoes as if the ship itself was tilting, flooding only this corridor. The door creaked open. I smelled the sea, rotten, heavy, choking, and behind it stood figures in tuxedos and gowns, drenched, their skin bloated and gray. They smiled, teeth too white, too sharp. One of them raised a champagne glass and said, "Welcome, guest. We've been expecting you." Before I could scream, dozens of wet, clammy hands reached out, pulling me toward the doorway, into that impossible room. I twisted, clawing, my fingernails scraping against the door frame, but the music swallowed my cries, and then silence. I don't remember blacking out, but when I opened my eyes, I was standing in that ballroom. It was grander than anything on the ship. Chandeliers swung overhead, dripping with salt water instead of crystals. Tables stretched forever, covered in food that looked exquisite until you blinked. Then it was crawling with rot, fish bones, seaweed tangled between platters. The guests laughed, their tuxedos and gowns dripping, their shoes squelching on the soaked floor. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the candlelight like deep-sea creatures. A string quartet played in the corner, but the instruments were warped, the sound bending in ways that made my head ache. Someone placed a glass in my hand. I don't know who. They were just suddenly there, towering over me, their bloated fingers curling around mine. Inside the glass wasn't champagne. It was thick, dark. It smelled like the ocean floor. "Drink," they whispered in unison, dozens of voices spilling into one. My throat locked. I shook my head. The room stilled. Every figure turned toward me. Water dripped steadily from their jaws. The silence pressed down on me harder than their laughter had. "Drink," they repeated, louder this time. The glass shook in my hand. My reflection rippled on its surface. Not mine exactly, but a drowned version of me. Skin blue, eyes clouded, lips torn. I screamed and hurled it across the ballroom. The glass never shattered. Instead, it dissolved mid-air, splashing into waves that rolled across the floor. And with it, the guests lunged. Hands clawed my arms, my neck, pulling me under. I fell, choking, not on air but on salt water that had no end. My lungs burned. I kicked, fought, but there was no surface anymore. Only darkness and muffled laughter echoing above. Somewhere in that endless black, a voice hissed against my ear. "You're ours now, just like the others." I woke up in my cabin, gasping, sheets soaked through. The clock read 7:12 a.m. For a second, I convinced myself it was a nightmare. But when I looked down, my shoes were still wet. Salt crystals crusted the cuffs of my pants. My fingernails were torn, broken against something hard. And on the little desk in the corner of my cabin sat a single champagne glass, half full. That night, another announcement played through the PA system. Calm. Cheerful. Too cheerful. Ladies and gentlemen, a reminder. Tonight at midnight, a special gathering will be held in the grand ballroom. We hope to see you there. I turned off the speaker in my room, but it didn't matter. Even without it, I could still hear the faint sound of laughter, of clinking glasses, coming through the walls. And I swear, sometimes when I pass that part of the corridor, there's a wet footprint that isn't mine, leading straight to where cabin 309 should be. So if you ever find yourself on a cruise, and there's a door where there shouldn't be, or a ballroom that no one admits exists, don't go inside. Don't listen to the laughter. Because once you hear the toast, you'll never walk back out. Diu. Story 3. They told us never to open the portholes after midnight, not because of the weather, not because of the sea spray, because sometimes something knocks from the other side. My name's Daniel, and I was 27 when I took my first cruise. It wasn't some luxury getaway. I just quit my job, burned out, and needed a reset. A buddy had an extra ticket after his girlfriend bailed, so I figured, why not? Week at sea, food included, maybe a few drinks. At worst, I'd come home with a sunburn and some stupid photos. From the moment I stepped onto the ship, I kept noticing little rules tucked into the daily itinerary. No wandering past Deck 7 after dark, no access to the crew hallways, and in bold red letters, passengers are advised to keep portholes sealed at night. At first, I laughed. What were they worried about? Seagulls. But the second night, around 2 a.m., I heard it. A single knock, soft, from the other side of the glass. My cabin was on Deck 5, just above the waterline. Nothing should have been there. The waves were choppy, black against the hull. I told myself it was just the ocean slamming against the steel. But then it came again. 3 slow taps, rhythmic. Not the sea, not random. Like someone was asking to be let in. I pulled the curtain shut and crawled back into bed, my heart jackhammering. By breakfast, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But when I looked around the dining hall, I noticed something. Other passengers, normal folks, families, couples, kept glancing at each other with the same nervous look. Like they'd heard it too, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. That night, I swore I'd stay up, just to prove to myself it was nothing. I sat by the window, phone in hand, watching the black water roll by. Midnight came. Nothing. 1 a.m. Nothing. Then, without warning, the curtain moved. Like something brushed it from the other side. I froze, my breath catching. The tapping started again, this time harder. The porthole glass shivered in its frame. I didn't move, didn't even blink. And then I saw it. A face. Pressed against the glass, bloated, pale, hair drifting as though underwater. Its eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, lips pulled back in a drowned smile. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the chair. The curtain snapped shut on its own, like someone yanked it from the outside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, when I tried to tell my buddy, he laughed it off, until a woman 2 tables over leaned in and whispered, "You saw them too, didn't you?" The woman's words hit me harder than the face I'd seen at the glass. I wasn't crazy. Others had seen it too. She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Don't open the curtains. Don't touch the glass. Whatever you do, don't let them think you're listening." Before I could ask what she meant, her husband tugged her arm, shooting me a sharp look. They left their half-finished breakfast behind and hurried out. I tried to laugh it off, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. All day, I caught myself looking at the portholes along the hallways. Some passengers had taped towels over theirs. Some cabins looked empty, even though I'd seen families check in. And once, just once, I swear I saw a movement behind a covered window, like the towel bulged outward for a split second, as though someone pressed against it from the other side. That night, my buddy passed out early after drinking way too much. I sat awake again, staring at the curtain. I told myself I wouldn't move, no matter what. But when the first knock came, my skin crawled so hard it felt like my bones rattled. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. The rhythm wasn't random anymore. It was deliberate, a pattern. And then I heard something worse than the knocks. A voice, muffled through the glass, warping like it was bubbling up through water. "Daniel!" I froze. Nobody on this ship should have known my name. The curtain twitched. The knocking grew frantic. Whoever, whatever. It was pressed harder. The window pane groaned under the pressure. For a horrifying second, I thought it would shatter and pour the sea inside. I backed toward the door, ready to run, when my buddy sat up suddenly in bed. His eyes were half shut, like he was sleepwalking, and he started whispering, "Let them in! Let them in!" I grabbed his shoulders and shook him hard until he blinked awake, confused. He had no memory of saying anything. The next morning, his nose bled all through breakfast, and across the hall, another cabin door stayed shut the entire day. By the evening, crew members quietly wheeled out suitcases from that room and loaded them onto a cart. No family followed. No one asked questions. That night, I swore I'd keep the lights on and record everything with my phone. If it happened again, I'd have proof. But when the clock hit 2 a.m., the knocking didn't come from the porthole this time. It came from inside the bathroom mirror. The sound of knuckles on glass echoed in my skull, though the bathroom mirror was just inches thick and set into the wall. I stood frozen, staring at my own reflection. The knocks came again, 3 slow, deliberate thuds from behind the glass. My reflection didn't move, not even a blink. That's when I realized the person in the mirror wasn't me. The angle was wrong, the expression too stiff. His lips curled just slightly upward, a smile I wasn't wearing. And when the reflection whispered, "Open up," my chest locked up like my lungs had forgotten how to work. I staggered backward, knocking over the trash bin. My buddy mumbled from his bed, still half asleep, but didn't stir enough to see what was happening. The mirror fogged slightly, though the bathroom was ice cold. Shapes pressed outward, fingers, palms, faces, rippling beneath the surface, like the mirror was a pool of water. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture. The flash went off, lighting the room in white for a split second. When my vision cleared, the mirror was normal again. Just me. Just my terrified face staring back. But when I checked the photo, my heart stopped. It wasn't me in the picture. It was a drowned version of me. Skin pale and bloated, eyes black, hair floating upward as though I were underwater. And behind him, dozens of others. Some children, some old, some still clutching champagne flutes, frozen mid-toast. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the phone. I deleted the picture instantly, like destroying the evidence might undo what I'd seen. But the moment I hit delete, a faint laugh echoed from the mirror, the kind of laugh that comes from a room full of people. The next morning, I barely left the cabin. My buddy was complaining of headaches, nosebleeds, and dreams he couldn't remember. His skin looked pale. His lips tinged blue. He swore he'd just had too much sun, but I couldn't ignore the way he kept glancing toward the curtain, like he was waiting for something. At lunch, I overheard 2 crew members whispering near the galley. One said, "Another one last night." The other just shook his head and muttered, "Porthole cabin, always the same." By the time night fell again, I was pacing, paranoid, jumping at every creak. I tried to convince myself I wouldn't hear it this time, that it had been a hallucination. But at exactly 2:07 a.m., the sound returned. Not from the porthole, not from the mirror. This time, the knocking came from inside the closet. And the voice wasn't whispering anymore. It was chanting my name. The chanting from the closet started low, like a single voice repeating my name. But within seconds, it layered 2 voices, 5, 10, until it was a chorus whispering through the slats. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I couldn't move. My buddy stirred in his bed, mumbling something incoherent, before falling still again. The closet door rattled once, then again, harder. I lunged forward and shoved a chair under the handle, but the instant I stepped back, the room fell silent. The air grew heavier, damp, like breathing through seawater. Every hair on my arms rose. Then came the sound. A long, wet drag across the floorboards inside the closet, like someone's hand, or something worse, was being pulled through brine. I bolted. The cabin door slammed so hard behind me that I nearly screamed. I stumbled into the corridor, chest heaving, and looked both ways. Empty. Not a single passenger, not even the hum of distant voices. Just the faint, steady creak of the ship swaying with the waves. I sprinted toward the elevators, but when the doors opened, the car was filled with water, sloshing out onto the carpet before the doors closed again. My reflection swirled on the surface like oil. I staggered back and took the stairs, feet pounding down, until I reached the main atrium. Lights flickered overhead. Music played faintly, though every lounge and bar was closed. I recognized the melody instantly. It was the same warped waltz I'd heard through the bathroom mirror. And then I saw them. Passengers. Or what looked like passengers. They drifted through the space like puppets, their limbs stiff, faces too pale. Water dripped steadily from their clothes, forming a spreading pool across the marble floor. None of them looked at me, but I felt them all sense me as though they shared one mind. I turned to run, straight into a crew member. His grip was iron on my arm. His eyes darted nervously at the drowned figures. "You need to get back to your cabin," he hissed. "I'm not going back there," I stammered. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand. The ship doesn't like when passengers wander at night." He shoved me toward the corridor, and for a second, I swore his skin was as pale as theirs, a faint blue creeping across his lips. But when I blinked, he looked normal again, uniform crisp, expression hard. By the time I reached my deck, my buddy was standing in the hallway outside our cabin. Only he wasn't moving. He was drenched, water streaming from his hair, pooling at his bare feet. His eyes were wide open but blank, glassy, like he was staring straight through me. And when his lips finally parted, seawater poured out, splashing onto the carpet. My throat locked as my buddy's jaw hung open, seawater spilling in a steady stream. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, his chest didn't rise or fall. And then, in a voice that wasn't his, wet, layered, guttural, he whispered, "You should never have left your cabin." I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. My hands slipped on the damp wallpaper as I tried to steady myself, but it was already soaking, like the whole ship was sweating seawater. The overhead lights flickered violently, buzzing, before the corridor was plunged into darkness. The only sound was the trickle of water pouring from my friend's mouth. Then another sound joined it. Dozens of footsteps, wet and synchronized, slapping against the carpet. Shapes emerged at the far end of the hall. Passengers, or what had once been passengers. Their faces drooped, skin pale and swollen, clothes sagging heavy with seawater. They walked in unison, toward me, their heads tilting in eerie rhythm. I turned and bolted, slipping on the soaked carpet. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. My shoes splashed through puddles as I sprinted toward the atrium again. But when I burst through the double doors, the atrium wasn't the same. It stretched impossibly tall, chandeliers swaying above an endless black sea. The floor had vanished beneath me. I teetered on the edge of a marble step that led straight into dark, rippling water. And on the water, they floated. Hundreds of them, men, women, children, all smiling with blank, glassy eyes, their hands raised in unison as if welcoming me. My buddy was among them, drifting at the front. His lips parted again, and instead of words, I heard a roar of rushing waves inside my head. Then I saw him. A figure standing on the water's surface, tall and rigid, his face half shadow, half rotted away. His eyes glowed faintly blue like dying embers at the bottom of the sea. He raised a hand, and all the drowned passengers stilled instantly. "You boarded my vessel," he said. His voice wasn't sound. It was pressure, filling my skull, rattling my teeth. "You breathe my air. You drink my water. Now you belong to me." The chandeliers above crashed into the black water one by one, sparks hissing out as the sea swallowed them. The drowned passengers began to rise, their bodies lifting slowly into the air, arms still reaching toward me. I screamed and turned, but the doors were gone. There was no corridor, no exit, just endless, undulating ocean stretching where the ship should have been. The marble step beneath me cracked, split, and sank into the water. I fell. Cold swallowed me instantly, pressing against my chest, crushing, filling my ears with muffled waltz music and distant laughter. I clawed upward, but the surface kept rising above me, receding, no matter how hard I swam. Shadows drifted closer, hands brushing against mine, pulling me deeper. And then, as my vision blurred, I saw cabins, whole rows of them, underwater, lights glowing warmly behind their windows. People moved inside, laughing, dancing, drinking. Their silhouettes shifted in slow, dreamlike motion. The last thing I remember before blackness swallowed me was my buddy's face in one of those windows, smiling like he'd never left. I woke up gasping. In my cabin. Dry. Alone. The clock read 3:12 a.m. My buddy's bed was empty. His things were gone, like he'd never been there at all. I stumbled into the corridor, heart still hammering, desperate to find him. But when I reached the atrium, everything was normal. Lights bright, crew bustling, passengers laughing. Only one thing was different. On the notice board, tacked neatly among the day's activities, was a new sheet of paper. Midnight gathering, atrium deck, mandatory attendance. And beneath it, in fresh ink, one line stood out to me. Welcome to your new home at sea. High voltage. That's where I'll leave you. Because what happened after, I don't think words will ever be enough. If you're listening to this and you ever take a cruise, remember, sometimes the ship isn't taking you anywhere. Sometimes it's bringing you in. And before we move on, if you're into true horror encounters like this, make sure you subscribe to Midnight Outcry and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. You never know which story might save you when it's too late. Story 4. I don't care how many cruises you've been on, nothing prepares you for sitting down at dinner across from someone who isn't supposed to exist. The first time I saw him, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks. He was already seated when we walked into the dining hall, tucked away at the far end of the table reserved for our group. Tall, pale, neatly dressed in a dark suit that looked a little outdated. He didn't eat, he didn't drink. He just sat there, hands folded, watching us with a polite half-smile that never changed. My wife, Claire, nudged me and whispered, "Did you notice they never introduced him?" That was when it clicked. The maitre d' had greeted everyone by name when we arrived, one by one, marking us off on a chart. But when it came to that man, nothing. No name, no checkmark, just silence. I tried to laugh it off, but the moment I looked back, I realized none of the waiters acknowledged him either. They moved past his chair like he wasn't even there. But he was. He had weight in his presence, a shadow against the tablecloth, a reflection in the glass. I told myself maybe he was a late addition, someone shuffled onto our table without fuss. But then why wouldn't anyone else look at him? Why were Claire and I the only ones who seemed to notice? That night, when we left the dining hall, I glanced back. The man in the suit was still sitting there, alone at the end of the long table, smiling faintly like he knew something I didn't. I wish I had walked away. I wish I had ignored it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing on a ship at sea. Because the next day, he wasn't just at dinner, he was everywhere. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his slicked back hair, the way his lips twitched, as though he was trying to smile but couldn't quite figure out how. When I finally did drift off, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside our cabin. Slow, measured, deliberate. Claire stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She didn't even open her eyes. Probably the steward go back to sleep. But it wasn't a steward. I know it wasn't. The steps stopped directly outside our door. Then, 2 sharp knocks. Not frantic, not casual, just rhythmic. Knock, knock. I held my breath. Whoever it was didn't call out, didn't move away, just stood there in silence. After a full minute, the sound of retreating footsteps finally came, fading down the corridor. The next morning at breakfast, I scanned the room before sitting down. My stomach dropped when I spotted him again. Same black suit, same pale skin, seated at the far end of the dining hall. This time, he wasn't alone. He had a table full of people around him. But here's the thing, none of them were talking. They were just sitting there, stiff, staring at their plates. Every once in a while, one of them would glance up at him, almost like they were waiting for permission to move. I nudged Claire. "Do you see him?" "Who?" I pointed, my hand trembling. "That guy in the suit." She followed my finger, frowned, then shook her head. "There's nobody there." Her words hit me harder than they should have. I stared back at the table. He was still there, clear as day. And as if sensing my panic, his head snapped up. Our eyes locked. The corner of his mouth finally stretched into that smile. I couldn't eat after that. My appetite was gone, replaced with a gnawing dread. I excused myself, claiming I needed air, but even out on deck with the sun blazing overhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And I was right. Out of the corner of my eye, past the pool, near the shuffleboard court, I saw him again, just standing there, hands clasped neatly in front of him, staring directly at me. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, that I'd imagined it. But when we passed a group of families heading back inside, I caught something I'll never forget. One of the little kids broke from his parents, running ahead, giggling. He tripped right in front of the suited man, and instead of helping, the man simply leaned down and whispered something in the boy's ear. The kid froze. His laughter died instantly. He just stood there, stiff as the people at his table, before slowly walking back to his parents like nothing had happened. When I glanced back, the man was gone. That night, I told myself I'd stay awake, keep watch, prove to myself it wasn't real. But around 2 a.m., exhaustion took over. I woke to the sound of the balcony door sliding open. Claire was gone from the bed, and standing at the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlit ocean, was the man in the suit. I jolted upright, my throat so dry I could barely form words. The moonlight framed him perfectly. Tall, rigid, every line of that black suit sharp against the pale glow of the ocean. "Claire," my voice cracked. He tilted his head slowly, the way a dog might when it hears something strange. Only it wasn't curious, it was mocking. Behind him, the balcony curtains swayed gently, though there was no wind. "Where is she?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stepped inside. The air in the room changed instantly, heavy, cold. My lungs struggled to expand, like I was inhaling water instead of air. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the edge of the bed. "You don't belong here," he said finally. His voice wasn't what I expected. It wasn't deep or booming. It was calm, flat. A voice you'd trust in a crowded room. And maybe that was what made it so terrifying. "I want Claire," I said, forcing myself to sound steady even though my knees were about to give out. "Where is she?" He raised one hand, not pointing, just palm up, as if offering me something invisible. And in that moment, the strangest sensation hit me. My body wanted to move toward him, like something inside me recognized him, longed for him. My chest ached with it. I had to grip the nightstand to stop myself from stepping forward. "Come," he murmured. The word rang in my head like an echo in a cavern. I snapped out of it when the lamp beside me flickered violently, the bulb popping in a burst of sparks. The room plunged into near darkness, just the faint light of the moon casting shadows across his face. And then, he wasn't smiling anymore. His expression twisted into something hollow, the skin around his mouth stretching unnaturally wide. That was enough to break me. I lunged for the phone on the desk and grabbed the receiver, but the line was dead, not static, dead. When I turned back, he was gone. The balcony door stood wide open, curtains flapping gently now, as if mocking me. I rushed outside, half expecting to see him clinging to the rail, but the deck was empty. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, but Claire, she wasn't there. I tore through the cabin, checking the bathroom, the closet under the bed like an idiot. Nothing. My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat. Then, just as I was about to sprint out the door and scream for help, I saw it. On the dresser. Her bracelet. The one she never took off. Only it was sitting inside a folded napkin, neatly placed there like a gift. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside, written in the same careful handwriting I'd seen earlier on the room service menus, was a single line: "She dined with me." I didn't remember leaving the cabin. 1 second I was staring at that napkin, and the next I was pounding down the carpeted hallway barefoot, clutching Claire's bracelet so tight it cut into my palm. Every cabin door I passed looked the same, each one a silent witness refusing to help. I banged on the nearest door. A sleepy middle-aged man cracked it open. "What's the matter?" he asked groggily. "My friend. She's missing. Have you seen anyone in a black suit? Tall, pale, dark hair." The man's expression froze. His eyes darted to the floor, and without another word, he shut the door. The latch clicked. I moved on, knocking, begging, but everyone reacted the same way. They'd look startled at the description, then retreat like I'd cursed them. Some didn't even answer. By the time I made it to the elevator lobby, I was gasping for breath. A steward stood there, adjusting his tie, clipboard tucked under his arm. He smiled politely until I gave the description. Then the smile died. "You need to go back to your room," he said firmly. "What? No. My friend. She's gone. Someone took her." His voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "We don't talk about him." The doors opened behind him. He gave me one last look, a warning, before stepping inside. I didn't follow. My legs locked in place. My mind was reeling, trying to process what he had just said. "We don't talk about him. Who the hell was him?" I stumbled to the guest services desk, but the girl working there barely met my eyes. "Everything's fine, sir," she repeated over and over, like a script she'd been forced to memorize. When I slammed the bracelet and napkin on the counter, her face went white. She snatched them both away, sliding them out of sight like contraband. "I don't know where you got these," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but don't ever show them again. For your own safety." I grabbed her wrist before she could turn. "Tell me the truth." Her eyes darted to the cameras overhead. She leaned in. "He comes when the ship is at sea. He chooses who he wants. Once they accept, they don't come back." "Accept what?" My throat was dry. She swallowed hard. "His invitation." Before I could press further, a supervisor appeared from the back, his expression stiff and unfriendly. He pulled the girl aside, muttering something I couldn't hear. She didn't look back at me. Not once. I backed away, the reality hitting me like a tidal wave. Claire hadn't just disappeared. She'd been taken, chosen. And then it struck me. She'd mentioned earlier that she was craving dessert, the midnight dessert buffet. I ran. The hallway blurred as I pushed past confused passengers, my bare feet slapping against the polished floor. When I reached the dining level, my stomach dropped. The grand ballroom doors, the ones I hadn't even noticed before, were wide open. Music drifted out, soft and alluring, like violins echoing across water. Laughter, too, mingling with the clinking of glasses. I stepped inside. The room was beautiful. Chandeliers glowed golden, tables glittered with untouched desserts, glasses of champagne bubbled at every place setting. But the guests, they weren't right. Their movements were too smooth, their laughter too perfectly timed. It felt less like a party and more like a rehearsal. And at the center, standing behind a long banquet table, was the man in the suit. Claire sat beside him. Her head turned slowly as I entered, her face pale but her lips curved into a strange, dreamy smile. She raised a glass, her eyes glassy, and whispered, "He's been waiting for you." The sound of crystal glasses chiming filled the ballroom, but none of the guests were actually drinking. They just held their glasses high, frozen in a moment of celebration that never ended. Their eyes followed me as I stepped closer, hundreds of stares pinning me in place. The man in the suit didn't move until I was only a few feet away. When he finally raised his head, I realized his smile hadn't changed once since I first saw him. It was too wide, stretched unnaturally across his face, and his teeth were just slightly wrong. Too many of them, too sharp. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and deep, but it echoed like he was speaking into a cavern. "You've come for her." Claire turned her head toward me again. Her movements weren't natural anymore. They were slow, delayed, like someone pulling invisible strings. She whispered, "It's beautiful here. Stay with us." I shook my head, my pulse hammering. "What do you want from us?" The man set his glass down gently. "It's not what I want. It's what the sea requires. Every voyage, it claims a few to keep balance. I simply extend the invitation. Some decline, most accept." "Invitation?" My voice cracked. He smiled wider. "A drink, a toast. A single sip is enough." She accepted. Claire's glass hovered at her lips. I lunged forward and slapped it away, but the moment it hit the floor, the entire room gasped in unison. The chandeliers flickered. The walls seemed to ripple, as though the water outside was pressing inward. The man in the suit leaned close, so close I could smell the salt on his breath. "You shouldn't have done that." The ballroom erupted. The guests rose, their laughter turning shrill, distorted. Their faces blurred, water pouring from their mouths and eyes. They moved toward me in perfect synchronization, dozens of drowned hands reaching out. I grabbed Claire's wrist and pulled, but she resisted, her body stiff. She whispered, almost pleading, "Don't fight it. He'll take us both." I didn't care. I dragged her toward the door, shoving through the crowd of dripping figures. Every touch burned cold, every grasp pulling me deeper into the nightmare. The chandeliers swung violently, showers of glass falling around us. We reached the threshold. I pulled Claire through and slammed straight into the guest services lobby. The ballroom was gone. Just white walls, fluorescent lights, and a desk where the girl from earlier stood, watching me silently. Claire was still at my side, but limp, her bracelet cutting into my palm. I spun back, but the ballroom doors weren't there anymore. Just blank wall. The girl's voice broke the silence. "You ran. No one ever runs," I shouted. "Where's the ballroom? Where is he?" She shook her head slowly. "If you saw him, it's already too late. You don't escape the invitation, you just delay it." Claire stirred, blinking up at me, confused. "What happened? Why are we here?" Relief flooded me. She didn't remember. She was safe. Or so I thought. Later that night, as I lay awake in the cabin, I heard the faint clink of glass. I turned my head. Claire was standing at the foot of the bed, her eyes glassy, her hand raised in a toast. Her lips moved, and though no sound came, I knew exactly what she was saying. "Cheers!" The glass slipped from her hand. But it didn't shatter. It dissolved, like water pouring back into the sea. Story 5. I first heard it just after midnight. A soft announcement echoed over the ship's PA, crisp and cheerful, inviting all passengers to a special midnight buffet on Deck 7. The words shouldn't have unsettled me, but they did, like a trap disguised as an invitation. My name is Lucas Morgan. I'm 32, a freelance photographer from San Diego, on this cruise to escape the chaos of my work life. I've always been drawn to ships, the way they float suspended between isolation and society. Usually cautious and quiet, I'm observant by nature, always noticing small details others overlook. That night, something about the announcement pulled me out of my cabin, despite a gnawing unease. The hallway was dim, the carpet muffling my steps, lights flickering as though unsure whether to stay on. A soft hum of engines vibrated through the walls, yet the air felt heavier, almost electric. I paused at the first corner and froze. A shadow flitted past the corridor end, disappearing before I could focus on it. I moved toward Deck 7, my camera slung over my shoulder. Every step seemed longer than the last, the hallway stretching, bending subtly as if the ship itself wanted to delay me. A faint perfume lingered, too sweet and not familiar to anyone I knew. I told myself it was nerves, but the chill crawling up my spine said otherwise. Then I saw him. A man in a black vest appeared at the far end of the hall, holding a crystal glass. His smile was polite, but too wide, too still. No one else was around. As I stepped closer, I noticed a passenger accepting a similar glass and, moments later, vanishing. The laughter and music behind the closed hall doors continued undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. I whispered into my recorder, hoping documenting this would anchor me. Something's wrong. People, they vanish. The crew, they act like they don't notice. I can't explain it, but this isn't normal. A soft giggle echoed from the hall's threshold. The door creaked slightly, and for a fraction of a second, I glimpsed a pale face, smiling from inside. Then, it vanished. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, and forced myself forward. The hallway stretched impossibly, the man in black, lifting his glass toward me as though toasting. I didn't yet realize this was the beginning of a reality no other passenger would see. Sleep didn't come. Every creak and distant thump made my pulse spike. The ship didn't feel like a vessel anymore. It felt alive, watching, shifting beneath my feet. I kept thinking about the vanished passengers, their smiles frozen in my memory, lingering in empty hallways. Around 11:30 p.m., I left my cabin again. The corridor to Deck 7 was quieter than usual. The lights flickered intermittently, elongating shadows. Soft laughter drifted from somewhere above, delicate clinks of glass punctuating the silence. Footsteps echoed, but they weren't mine alone. The hallway had changed. Carpets darkened, damp pooling in places. A warm light glowed faintly from a door slightly ajar. Music floated out, a warped, golden waltz that felt both inviting and sinister. The man in black appeared again, still holding his glass. I kept my distance. A young woman stepped out, smiling politely with a drink in her hand. She vanished seconds after drinking, leaving only droplets on the floor. My pulse jumped. I moved closer, camera rolling, trying to capture the impossible. Doors and mirrors appeared where none had existed before. I glimpsed passengers with hollow eyes staring at me from reflections, their smiles too wide, unblinking. I ducked into a cabin, slamming the door. The furniture shifted slightly as I caught my breath, curtains swaying though no breeze existed. My camera flickered. A soft knocking sounded from the wardrobe. Tap, tap, closer, then silence. I attempted the stairwell, hoping for a safe route. The doors opened, but the stairwell descended into a corridor I didn't recognize. Water pooled along the edges. At the far end, the man in black waited, and behind him, the vanished passengers emerged, drenched but smiling. Their lips didn't move, but laughter filled my head, endless and hollow. I realized then the ship didn't just trap people physically. It warped perception, memory, and time. Those who accepted the drinks were never seen again, yet their presence lingered, guiding the next victims. And now, I was next. I knew I shouldn't follow, but curiosity, or perhaps fear, propelled me forward. The corridor stretched, the music growing louder, yet strangely warped, like it was played underwater. The scent of sweet perfume intensified, curling around me, almost tangible. Every step felt heavier, as if the ship itself resisted my progress. I paused near a mirrored wall. Reflected in it were passengers I had never seen before, all staring at me. One man raised a glass toward me, lips curved in a calm, polite smile. Then he blinked and vanished. My camera captured nothing. I whispered, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But my voice sounded muffled, distant, like I was speaking underwater. Another step. A drip of water from above landed on my hand. I flinched. A whisper echoed behind me. "Join us." I spun, but the hallway was empty. Only the music persisted, soft yet relentless, wrapping around the walls and floor. The faint laughter of passengers I didn't recognize floated in the distance, just behind my vision, just out of reach. I tried to retrace my steps, but the hallway had shifted. Doors appeared where none had existed before. The stairwell seemed farther than I remembered. Every door was slightly ajar, faint light spilling out. I saw shadows moving inside, yet no sound emerged. Then a single, soft knock, slow, deliberate, from a door numbered 713. Hesitant, I approached. Inside, a long table was set for a grand feast, perfectly intact. Plates gleamed, glasses shimmered, but no one was seated. And then, just behind the table, a man in black appeared again, lifting a glass in my direction. He smiled politely, still too wide, eyes unnerving in their calmness. I whispered to my recorder, my hands trembling. I don't know how, but they're here. I think they never left. The ship, it keeps them, and now it wants me too. A distant clink echoed suddenly, startling me. I turned to see a figure in a white dress holding a glass, smiling. As she took a sip, she disappeared. My stomach churned, dread twisting tighter. The soft music swelled. Each note pressed against my chest. Each laugh gnawed at my sanity. The hallways became a maze. I moved cautiously, flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing warped corridors, flickering lights, and walls that seemed too close. Water puddled underfoot, soaking my shoes. The smell of salt and perfume blended in nauseating waves. Doors opened by themselves. I glimpsed passengers, frozen in mid-step, eyes wide but unseeing, mouths moving silently. I stumbled past them, heart hammering, and a soft whisper of, "Take a drink," brushed my ear. I almost turned, almost succumbed. I found the dining hall again. The feast glowed faintly under a single chandelier. Empty glasses lined the table as though waiting for me. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision. Then the man in black appeared at the far end, gesturing again with a glass. I stepped back, and the chandelier swung violently, casting flickering shadows that danced like moving silhouettes. My camera flickered. The passengers I had seen earlier were now stepping toward me from the walls themselves, their faces pale, wet, smiling. Hollow laughter echoed inside my skull, unstoppable, relentless. I tried the stairwell, desperate to escape, but it led me again into the same corridor, the music now deafening, the whispers chanting in rhythm with my heartbeat. My recorder crackled, replaying my own voice, but distorted, overlapped with other voices I didn't recognize. I stopped near door 713. Another knock, slow, deliberate. I barely managed to resist opening it. From inside, a soft, chilling laughter bubbled out. The music reached a crescendo, and for a moment, the corridor seemed infinite. Passengers appeared, not walking, but floating slightly above the floor, gliding in perfect formation. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into a puddle that reflected the ceiling. But instead of my own face, it showed them, dozens of them, smiling directly at me. Then I noticed it, a single, small detail. Their smiles weren't static, they widened as I watched. And in that instant, I knew the ship wasn't just trapping them. It was consuming them. And now, it wanted me. Story 72. Part 5. The midnight buffet I ran. Every corridor I took looped back to the same hall. The chandelier swung over the feast table, glasses tinkling without touch. I pressed against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My recorder continued playing, distorted voices layering over each other, forming incoherent chants. The man in black appeared again, this time closer, effortlessly gliding along the floor. His smile stretched wider, impossibly so. Behind him, passengers emerged from walls, mirrors, even the puddles beneath my feet. They moved in perfect unison, silent, yet threatening, their eyes locked on mine. I reached for a door, any door, opened it, only darkness. I stepped through and found myself back in my cabin. At first, relief, the bed untouched, the lights normal. But then I noticed my recorder resting on the desk. The playback was running. My own voice whispered repeatedly, "Take a drink. Join us." A soft tap echoed on my cabin door. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. The door handle rattled. My heart pounded, every nerve screaming. Then a shadow crossed the window. Not outside. The reflection. Behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only the air, thick, heavy, alive. And then, the faint, sweet smell of perfume, drifting close. A glass appeared on my desk. Crystal, untouched, shimmering with liquid. I didn't touch it. I can't. And yet, I can't leave the cabin. The ship has me. It always does. And somewhere, faintly, the soft, warped laughter of passengers rises, echoing through the walls. I don't know if I'll sleep tonight, or tomorrow, or ever. The midnight buffet is waiting. I ducked into a small alcove along the corridor, shaking, trying to collect myself. My hands were wet, my shoes squelching in the puddles on the floor. The faint music played in the distance, slower now, distorted like it was underwater. I fumbled for my voice recorder and whispered, "If you're listening, take a second to subscribe to Midnight Outcry. It helps keep stories like this alive." My voice shook, but somehow saying it aloud made me feel like I was still anchored in reality. Another corridor stretched ahead. The walls glistened, like fresh water was seeping through the metal. I thought I saw a shadow move, but it wasn't from the light. My heart jumped when a soft clink echoed behind me. I turned, but nothing. Just the faint outline of a door with light spilling from the edges. I crept toward it, each step careful. The handle was warm to the touch. The door opened to nothing but empty darkness, and yet I could feel someone watching me. A low laugh, playful but cruel, curled around the walls. I almost tripped as a breeze, or was it a whisper, brushed past my neck. Further down, another puddle reflected the ceiling, but this reflection wasn't mine. Faces swirled in the water, pale, smiling, some wet as if just pulled from the sea. One reached toward me, hand trembling. I jumped back, hitting the wall. The music warped again, swelling unnaturally, like the ship itself was breathing. I stumbled into what seemed like a dining area, a smaller version of the buffet hall, but half flooded, tables warped and dripping. And there, sitting calmly, the man in black lifted his glass in my direction. His smile was impossibly wide, his eyes fixed. "You can't hide," he said softly. The voice carried, echoing in my skull. "It's time to join us," I bolted. The puddles mirrored not the floor, but open ocean, stretching infinitely. My shoes sank, water rising unnaturally fast, the floor beneath me no longer solid. Every corridor seemed to loop, walls bending and twisting like they weren't meant to exist. I passed a cabin with number 713, familiar from before. I froze. The door opened slowly. A pale hand reached out, holding a glass. I ran. The floor beneath me shivered, and faint laughter followed, slipping into the soft hum of the engines. Somewhere in the distance, the warped music swelled, now louder, as if urging me to surrender. My chest burned. The voices whispered, "Just a sip, just one sip." I ducked behind a corner, gulping air. The corridor ahead split. Impossible architecture again. Mirrors reflected passages that weren't real. And then, faintly, a door at the very end of the hall glowed slightly. The glow beckoned, warm and sinister. I know if I step through it, I might never return. Yet every instinct tells me I'm already lost, and that's when I heard the softest whisper, almost intimate, curling into my ear. "We've been waiting for you." The glow at the end of the corridor pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, and my legs moved before I could think. Every step echoed unnaturally, the sound bouncing off walls that didn't seem to exist. My flashlight flickered violently, casting shadows that weren't mine, shapes stretching, bending, some reaching for me, vanishing when I blinked. The warped music was louder now, a distorted waltz, carrying laughter that felt impossibly close. I pressed on, my chest burning, water rising over my shoes. The air smelled of iron, salt, and something else, something rotten, decayed, yet strangely sweet. Ahead, the door glowed brighter. As I neared, I realized it was not a door at all, but a passage into a grand hall, half flooded, half real, half impossible. Guests sat at tables, untouched by the water around them, lifting glasses, smiles frozen yet alive. Their eyes were hollow, endless pools reflecting nothing but fear. And at the center the man in black stood, perfectly still, glass raised, grinning. "You came," he said softly. His voice seeped into my bones. "We've been waiting." I tried to step back, but the floor beneath me shifted. Corridors I had just run through now appeared behind me, looping impossibly, twisting like the ship itself had become alive. I tripped over a warped chair, water lapped my knees. A soft knock echoed from the water, followed by another. And another. Not all in rhythm, chaotic, unpredictable. From every table, every reflection in the water, the knocking grew louder, closer, converging into a deafening chorus. A figure floated near the ceiling, a passenger from an earlier deck, pale, dripping, face unrecognizable, arms outstretched. "Join us," it whispered. The voice sounded like 1,000 others layered at once. My stomach turned. I sprinted toward what I thought was the exit, only for the hall to stretch infinitely. Doors and corridors bending, the walls breathing. Another table of drowned guests rose from the water, their wet hands reaching for me. Their smiles were wide, serene, and terrifyingly patient. A sudden flash. I was back in the corridor, the glow gone, but the water still rising. I heard the soft clinking of glasses behind me. I dared a glance. The man in black was walking calmly toward me, each step leaving ripples in the floor that weren't water, but shadows. "You can't leave," he said, calm, almost conversational. "It's your turn now." I bolted blindly. Mirrors appeared on either side, showing reflections that weren't me. In one, I saw myself sitting at a table, glass in hand, smiling. In another, my body drifted face down in water I hadn't noticed. The stairwell appeared suddenly. I lunged for it, feet splashing. But when I opened the door, it wasn't the stairwell at all. It was my cabin, empty, dim, familiar. A sense of relief washed over me until the faintest clink sounded from the hallway. I froze. There, outside my door, was the man in black holding a glass. He tilted it gently toward me. And behind him, a dozen shadowy figures moved silently, faces grinning, eyes hollow, all raising glasses in unison. I backed into my cabin, heart hammering, my flashlight dropping to the floor. The beam quivered. And then the music began again, slow and distorted, drifting from under the door. I wanted to scream, run, anything, but the hallway stretched on forever. Every door, every reflection, every whisper, every shadow whispered the same thing. "It's time to join us." I shut my eyes, praying it was a nightmare. But when I opened them, the glass was on my bedside table. Condensation, dripping, as if freshly poured. I can still hear the laughter. And I know, even as I record this, that if I take one sip, I will never leave this ship again. Story 6. I still remember the first night I saw it, the lighthouse. A lone beam slicing through the thick fog, sitting atop a deck that wasn't on any map. The announcement had never mentioned Deck L, and yet there it was, glowing faintly, like a heartbeat in the darkness. My name's Elliot Marston, I'm 32, a freelance photographer from Seattle. I booked this cruise to escape the grind, to capture the ocean in its endless moods. Adventurous, stubborn, a little anxious around enclosed spaces, but nothing could have prepared me for this. I wandered the upper decks late at night, camera slung over my shoulder, when the fog thickened unnaturally. Suddenly, the lighthouse appeared out of nowhere, its light spinning slowly, almost beckoning me closer. I felt an odd pull in my chest, like it wanted me to arrive. The decks were too quiet, the usual hum of the engines, distant laughter, even the chatter of other night wanderers. Everything was gone. Even the fog seemed alive, curling around my ankles as I approached. I thought I heard whispers riding the wind, but When I turned, no one was there. A crew member passed me in the corridor, a tall man in a dark uniform, but when I blinked, he vanished. No one else seemed to notice him. I reached the stairs to this phantom deck. The door wasn't on the plan, wasn't on the directory, and yet the keycard reader lit up at my touch. A soft chime invited me in. My hand shook as I swiped, heart hammering. Inside, the lighthouse room was small and circular, walls lined with damp metal. The smell of sea salt was overpowering, with a faint, acrid tang, like rusted iron mixed with smoke. The light spun from a brass lantern that looked centuries old, casting distorted shadows across the walls. On the far wall, a faded plaque read, Deck L, for those who arrive before the storm. I didn't understand what it meant, but water dripped rhythmically from the ceiling, echoing like a slow drumbeat. I set my camera down, intending to take a photo, but when I looked through the lens, the room seemed to shift. Shadows stretched and twisted. The lantern's glow revealed silhouettes of passengers in vintage attire, frozen mid-motion, pale faces with wide, empty smiles. Soft music and distant laughter carried through the room, though it remained empty. A chill ran down my spine. My flashlight flickered. In the corner, a figure leaned against the wall, a man in a captain's coat, eyes black and unnaturally reflective. He didn't move, didn't speak, yet I felt him studying me. I wanted to leave, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. I reached for the door, and it slammed shut behind me. The lighthouse lights spun faster, faster, until the shadows on the walls stretched into shapes I couldn't recognize. Somewhere above, the ship's horn wailed, warped and out of sync, echoing impossibly far, like it was meant only for me. I realized then that this deck wasn't supposed to exist, and everyone who had stepped onto it before, they had never returned. I barely slept that night, if you could call it sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the spinning lighthouse appeared behind my eyelids, casting its pale beam across a fog I couldn't shake. I kept my camera beside me, like a talisman, hoping it could capture something real, something tangible, to prove I hadn't lost my mind. Morning came, but the sunlight was muted, almost wrong. Deck L had vanished. The stairs I had entered through led only back to the empty corridor, lined with familiar cabins. Yet the lingering chill, the scent of salt and rust, remained on my clothes. I met Clara Jensen, a passenger from Chicago, during breakfast. She was mid-30s, cheerful but with a curiosity that mirrored mine. She mentioned seeing odd lights near the upper decks, faint music echoing in the hallways late at night. I thought I was imagining it, she admitted, eyes flicking nervously toward the ceiling, but it felt alive somehow. We agreed to investigate together, planning to wait until nightfall. The crew seemed oblivious to any unusual activity, though occasionally I caught glimpses of a tall man in a dark uniform, always disappearing when I looked directly. By 11:30 p.m., fog had rolled back in, thicker and almost glowing under the deck lights. Clara and I slipped past the sleeping corridors, heading toward where I had first seen the lighthouse. The air smelled metallic and damp, heavier with every step. Then, we saw it. Deck L had returned, as if it had never left. The keycard reader glowed, inviting, almost pulsing. I swore I could hear the faint echo of footsteps above, though the deck above was empty. Inside, the circular room felt smaller, closer, suffocating. Shadows moved along the walls, stretching unnaturally with each flicker of the lantern. The music was louder now, a warped waltz, playing as if in the room with us, but no instrument or source could be seen. "Did you hear that?" Clara whispered. A laugh, soft, hollow, and undeniably human, echoed from the corner. I swung my flashlight, revealing nothing, yet the shadows twisted in ways that suggested someone was moving just out of sight. We explored cautiously, stepping over puddles that hadn't been there before. Then, a hand, pale, dripping wet, emerged from the floorboards near the lantern. Clara screamed, and I stumbled back, knocking my camera to the floor. The lens captured a flicker of motion, a figure rising, clothes soaked and hanging in tatters, eyes black as ink staring at us. "Deck L," I muttered, shivering. "It's alive." A creak behind us drew our attention to the door. It was closing on its own, slow and deliberate. We ran to push it open, only to find the corridor had changed. Hallways twisted impossibly, numbers on cabin doors repeating in patterns that didn't exist. Each step echoed like we were sinking into water. I remembered the voice from the lighthouse, soft and impossible. "You're here. You've been chosen." I glanced at Clara. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the same terror I felt. The lantern flickered violently, and for a brief instant, I saw dozens of faces peering at us from the walls. Passengers from previous cruises, trapped forever, smiling as if nothing were wrong. The lighthouse beam spun faster, illuminating the entire circular room. Each rotation revealed figures stepping closer, reaching out, yet dissolving into shadow when I blinked. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. Somewhere deep in the ship a horn sounded. It distorted, almost mocking echo. Though no one was on deck, the water-like puddles beneath our feet rippled, as if something beneath was moving, waiting. I gripped Clara's arm tightly. "We need to get out now." As we scrambled toward the door, the spinning light of the lantern seemed to follow us, casting long, impossible shadows that lunged at our heels. I stumbled, falling hard, scraping my hands on the wet metal. The sound of soft footsteps surrounded us, circling, closing in, yet no one was visible. And then we heard it, a whisper, dry and cold, right next to my ear. "You can't leave, not yet." We didn't speak as we navigated the impossible corridors. Each hallway seemed to stretch forever, doors repeating themselves in numbers and designs, like the ship was mocking our very presence. I kept my hand on Clara's shoulder, feeling her tremble. The fog from the upper decks had crept inside, curling along the floor like it had a mind of its own. The lantern's beam still spun overhead, and every rotation revealed faint glimpses of passengers who should have been long gone. Faces pale as driftwood, eyes hollow yet staring directly at us. One figure raised a hand, a silent beckoning that made my stomach churn. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into a puddle that wasn't water, but something thicker, darker. "Keep moving," Clara whispered. Her voice quivered, but there was determination there too. She was braver than she realized. I glanced around, no exit in sight. The corridors twisted, stairs leading nowhere, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting like the ship had a heartbeat. I swear I could hear soft whispers behind each door, voices telling me to stay, to join them. Then we found it, a cabin with the number 0. The door was slightly ajar, glowing faintly. Inside, the air was warmer, almost suffocating. A music box sat in the center, spinning on its own, playing a haunting lullaby. The melody wrapped around us like chains. Clara gasped, "That music, it's following us." I noticed papers scattered across the floor, old manifests, crew logs, and passenger lists from decades ago, all listing names I recognized from the shadows in the hallways. My pulse spiked. Each name disappeared the moment I tried to read it fully. A sudden splash echoed from the ceiling above, then another. Water rained down, not from leaks, but as if the ship itself wept. Puddles on the floor shifted, forming faces, eyes blinking, mouths opening to whisper our names. I grabbed Clara, pushing her toward the stairwell we had come from, but it was gone. Replaced by a solid wall of steel, slick and damp. Panic clawed at me. The whispers grew louder, circling, echoing from all directions. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder, a cold, wet grip. I spun around, flashlight shaking, and saw him. The captain from Deck L, his eyes black, reflective, and impossibly deep. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Still, I heard it, in my mind. "You belong here now." I stumbled backward, tripping over one of the puddle faces, and fell hard. My camera hit the floor, snapping a photo. The flash illuminated dozens of figures rising behind him, passengers from other voyages, drowned or decayed, yet moving in eerie unison. They reached for us, silent, but insistent. Clara screamed, tugging me up, and we ran down a twisting hallway that wasn't there a second ago. The lanterns spun above, faster, blinding us. Shadows of hands stretched impossibly along the walls, merging with the fog, trying to pull us back. I grabbed my camera, clicking it wildly. The flash caught one figure close enough that I could see it fully. A passenger in a captain's uniform, but his face melted, dripping like candle wax. I wanted to vomit. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The fog swirled to reveal a door ahead. I didn't know if it led out, but I had no choice. Clara and I sprinted toward it. As we reached for the handle, the walls shifted again. I heard a laugh. Not human, not mechanical, but perfectly clear, echoing inside my skull. No one leaves Deck L. I yanked the door open, and for the first time, we saw the night sky. Stars twinkled above the railing, the familiar ocean stretching endlessly. Relief surged until I noticed the fog swirling around the upper decks, and floating above the water, faintly glowing, the lighthouse beam spun, scanning the ship. Something was coming, and it was looking for us. The railing beneath my fingers was slick with condensation, but I didn't stop. Clara's hand gripped mine tightly as we ran along the deck, our shoes splashing in puddles that seemed to appear and vanish with each step. The ship creaked in protest, the metal groaning like it carried centuries of grief. Above us, the lighthouse beam spun, scanning every corner. Its light was brighter than it should have been, cutting through the fog with surgical precision. I could feel it in my chest, like it was searching my very heartbeat. Clara whispered, trembling, Do you think anyone else has survived?" I shook my head, though the truth terrified me. Every time I looked back, shadowy figures lingered at the edge of the fog, half seen, watching. They didn't move forward, but the way the fog swirled around them made it impossible to tell if they were alive or dead. We ducked into the main hallway, the familiar corridors of the passenger decks, or what I thought were familiar. The carpet felt wrong underfoot, soaked and curling at the edges. Door numbers repeated, mismatched, and a soft melody floated from behind cabin 19. I froze. The music wasn't from the speakers, it was from inside the walls. A child's laughter echoed through the vent above, high-pitched, warped. My stomach turned. Clara grabbed my arm. "Keep moving!" We made it to the grand staircase. The railing was icy, slick, and the stairs seemed longer than they should have been. The ship's hum was quieter here, almost dead, but in the silence, I heard dripping water. No, something heavier, like footsteps in slow rhythm. Then it appeared. The elevator door opened on its own, glowing dimly. I knew we shouldn't, but instinct overrode reason. I pulled Clara with me, and we stepped inside. The numbers on the panel didn't make sense. Deck 13, Deck 7, and Deck L. My stomach sank. I pressed the button for Deck L, the lighthouse deck we were trying to escape. The elevator hummed and lurched, then stopped. The doors opened, not onto a deck, but a narrow corridor. Damp stone walls, carved like an old cathedral. I could hear them behind us, the drowned, the melted faces, the whispers from every voyage. They weren't chasing, they were herding us towards something. A faint glow appeared at the end of the corridor. I ran, my flashlight bouncing over walls slick with condensation. The glow revealed an archway etched with words I couldn't understand, but I felt them. "Stay! Belong!" Clara gasped as a hand brushed her shoulder. I spun. Nobody there, only shadows folding in on themselves. I heard a creak, and a soft, wet cough echoed from the walls. The hallway ended abruptly. The glow formed into a doorway. Beyond it, the lighthouse deck stretched impossibly high. The sea below calm but too dark, too still. And at the center of the deck, a figure stood. The captain from before, eyes black, uniform tattered but immaculate, holding a lantern that cast no shadow. "You've come far," he said, voice soft, echoing inside my skull. "But the light chooses who stays." Suddenly, fog swirled violently, and dozens of figures emerged, rising from the sea and the deck itself. They reached for us, hands dripping, faces smiling impossibly wide. I pulled Clara back, but her foot slipped. Screaming, she almost fell. I grabbed her just in time. I tried to run, but the deck extended infinitely ahead. The captain lifted the lantern. The beam hit me square in the chest. My body froze. I felt my mind pulling toward the fog, toward the sea below, toward them. And then I remembered the camera in my bag. I pulled it out, snapping photo after photo. Each flash made the figures hesitate, flicker like holograms. I realized this was their weakness. Light, reality, proof that we still existed outside their realm. Clara whispered, barely audible, "Do you think we can make it?" I didn't answer. I kept snapping. The captain's smile widened, and the figures lunged closer. The fog pressed in, cold and wet, whispering my name. I felt a hand on my shoulder, a cold, wet grip. I spun. Empty. The grip lingered. Not human, not tangible. Yet I could feel it pulling me, bending me toward the railing. The lighthouse beam spun one last time, illuminating something I hadn't noticed before. The entire deck was surrounded by mirrors, reflecting the fog, the sea, and the drowned. Infinite reflections. There was nowhere left to run. And then I realized the lantern's glow was spreading, the shadows recoiling, the whispers fading, but the beam of the lighthouse, it wasn't scanning the ship anymore. It was scanning us. The last thing I remember before being pulled toward the fog was Clara screaming my name. The cold, wet hand wrapping around me, and the captain whispering softly, "You can never leave the light. Not now." The fog wasn't just around us anymore. It was inside us. Each breath tasted like brine and decay. I felt Clara's grip slip for a moment, her fingers brushing mine as if she were already being pulled into the mist. The captain's lantern hovered between us, floating impossibly, casting light that bent the edges of reality. His smile hadn't changed, but his eyes were endless black pits. "The light chooses," he whispered, echoing as if my thoughts had become his voice. I stumbled toward the mirrors, hoping to use them as a shield. Each reflection multiplied the figures behind us. The drowned, the twisted, the smiling faces of passengers who had vanished days ago. They weren't running. They were patient. They knew I would tire. I grabbed Clara's arm. "We need the elevator," I hissed. But the corridor back didn't exist. Only fog, mirrors, and the lighthouse deck stretching infinitely, each plank soaked, each railing warped. Then one of the reflections moved independently, not mirroring me, not mirroring Clara. A little girl, hair plastered to her face, eyes black, skin pale as bone. She pointed toward the lantern, her mouth opening wide. But no sound came. A silent scream. Clara whispered, terrified, "We shouldn't be here." I turned to run, but the mirrors rippled like water. My reflection staggered, twisted, and smiled. Another hand, cold and wet, closed around my wrist. Not Clara's, not human. Panic seized me. I swung the flashlight at the figure, and it vanished like smoke, but the fog closed in faster. I realized then. The lighthouse was not a deck. It was a trap. A collection point. The captain's lantern didn't just illuminate, it marked. Each flash of light tethered us closer to them, closer to being chosen. Clara tugged me to the edge. I could see the water far below, calm but black, endless. One misstep, one slip, and it would claim us instantly. I grabbed the lantern with shaking hands. It was heavier than it looked, almost alive. The glow penetrated the fog, momentarily burning the shadows. Figures recoiled. I realized the photos I had taken earlier weren't just proof. They were wards. I snapped a few pictures, each flash searing through the fog. Clara's scream echoed, distant yet right beside me. A shadow surged from the mirrors, an entire mass of faces, reaching, twisting, trying to merge into one. I felt myself pulled forward, toward the railing, toward the endless black sea. My foot hit the edge. I stumbled. Clara screamed. I threw the lantern, hoping the light would buy us a moment. It exploded in brilliance, scattering shadows into the fog. We fell backward into the mirrors, crashing through them. The glass cut our hands, arms, but we kept moving. The reflection cracked and fractured, showing glimpses of the real ship, but always pulling us back into the lighthouse realm. I saw the captain one last time. He raised a hand, not to stop us, but as a warning. His whisper followed. The deck never forgets. The light never forgives. Then the world tilted. The fog, the mirrors, the deck, they all blurred. We were falling through something impossible. The lighthouse lantern spun above, spinning faster, brighter, until it was nothing but a white-hot point, and the reflections of the drowned merged with our own. I opened my eyes, and the cruise deck was empty. Silent, no fog, no lighthouse, just the normal, calm hum of engines and the distant murmur of passengers above. Clara clutched my arm, pale and shivering. We ran to the nearest cabin. I tried to call security, tell them, but the phones were dead, and when I peeked out, the lighthouse deck was gone. The map showed no Deck L anywhere. That night, I kept the camera beside me. Every photo I had taken of the lantern, the drowned, the endless fog, they were blank. All of them, Clara whispered. Did it even happen? I don't answer. I know. Somewhere just beyond the veil of normality, the lighthouse deck waits. The captain waits. The light waits. And we are still tethered. I feel it when I close my eyes. A whisper across the deck, a cold hand brushing my shoulder. And every time the fog touches my mind, I remember. Some decks never exist, but they never forget you either. I don't care how many cruises you've been on, nothing prepares you for sitting down at dinner across from someone who isn't supposed to exist. The first time I saw him, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks. He was already seated when we walked into the dining hall, tucked away at the far end of the table reserved for our group. Tall, pale, neatly dressed in a dark suit that looked a little outdated. He didn't eat, he didn't drink. He just sat there, hands folded, watching us with a polite half-smile that never changed. My wife, Claire, nudged me and whispered, "Did you notice they never introduced him?" That was when it clicked. The maitre d' had greeted everyone by name when we arrived, one by one, marking us off on a chart. But when it came to that man, nothing. No name, no checkmark, just silence. I tried to laugh it off, but the moment I looked back, I realized none of the waiters acknowledged him either. They moved past his chair like he wasn't even there. But he was. He had weight in his presence, a shadow against the tablecloth, a reflection in the glass. I told myself maybe he was a late addition, someone shuffled onto our table without fuss. But then why wouldn't anyone else look at him? Why were Claire and I the only ones who seemed to notice? That night, when we left the dining hall, I glanced back. The man in the suit was still sitting there, alone at the end of the long table, smiling faintly like he knew something I didn't. I wish I had walked away. I wish I had ignored it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing on a ship at sea, because the next day he wasn't just at dinner, he was everywhere. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his slicked back hair, the way his lips twitched, as though he was trying to smile but couldn't quite figure out how. When I finally did drift off, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside our cabin. Slow, measured, deliberate. Claire stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She didn't even open her eyes. Probably the steward go back to sleep. But it wasn't a steward. I know it wasn't. The steps stopped directly outside our door. Then, 2 sharp knocks. Not frantic, not casual, just rhythmic. Knock, knock. I held my breath. Whoever it was didn't call out, didn't move away, just stood there in silence. After a full minute, the sound of retreating footsteps finally came, fading down the corridor. The next morning at breakfast, I scanned the room before sitting down. My stomach dropped when I spotted him again. Same black suit, same pale skin, seated at the far end of the dining hall. This time, he wasn't alone. He had a table full of people around him. But here's the thing. None of them were talking. They were just sitting there, stiff, staring at their plates. Every once in a while, one of them would glance up at him, almost like they were waiting for permission to move. I nudged Claire. "Do you see him?" "Who?" I pointed, my hand trembling. "That guy in the suit." She followed my finger, frowned, then shook her head. "There's nobody there." Her words hit me harder than they should have. I stared back at the table. He was still there, clear as day. And as if sensing my panic, his head snapped up. Our eyes locked. The corner of his mouth finally stretched into that smile. I couldn't eat after that. My appetite was gone, replaced with a gnawing dread. I excused myself, claiming I needed air, but even out on deck with the sun blazing overhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And I was right. Out of the corner of my eye, past the pool, near the shuffleboard court, I saw him again, just standing there, hands clasped neatly in front of him, staring directly at me. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, that I'd imagined it. But when we passed a group of families heading back inside, I caught something I'll never forget. One of the little kids broke from his parents, running ahead, giggling. He tripped right in front of the suited man, and instead of helping, the man simply leaned down and whispered something in the boy's ear. The kid froze. His laughter died instantly. He just stood there, stiff as the people at his table, before slowly walking back to his parents like nothing had happened. When I glanced back, the man was gone. That night, I told myself I'd stay awake, keep watch, prove to myself it wasn't real. But around 2 a.m., exhaustion took over. I woke to the sound of the balcony door sliding open. Claire was gone from the bed, and standing at the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlit ocean, was the man in the suit. I jolted upright, my throat so dry I could barely form words. The moonlight framed him perfectly. Tall, rigid, every line of that black suit sharp against the pale glow of the ocean. "Claire," my voice cracked. He tilted his head slowly, the way a dog might when it hears something strange. Only it wasn't curious, it was mocking. Behind him, the balcony curtains swayed gently, though there was no wind. "Where is she?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stepped inside. The air in the room changed instantly, heavy, cold. My lungs struggled to expand, like I was inhaling water instead of air. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the edge of the bed. "You don't belong here," he said finally. His voice wasn't what I expected. It wasn't deep or booming. It was calm, flat. A voice you'd trust in a crowded room. And maybe that was what made it so terrifying. "I want Claire," I said, forcing myself to sound steady even though my knees were about to give out. "Where is she?" He raised one hand, not pointing, just palm up, as if offering me something invisible. And in that moment, the strangest sensation hit me. My body wanted to move toward him, like something inside me recognized him, longed for him. My chest ached with it. I had to grip the nightstand to stop myself from stepping forward. "Come," he murmured. The word rang in my head like an echo in a cavern. I snapped out of it when the lamp beside me flickered violently, the bulb popping in a burst of sparks. The room plunged into near darkness, just the faint light of the moon casting shadows across his face. And then, he wasn't smiling anymore. His expression twisted into something hollow, the skin around his mouth stretching unnaturally wide. That was enough to break me. I lunged for the phone on the desk and grabbed the receiver, but the line was dead, not static, dead. When I turned back, he was gone. The balcony door stood wide open, curtains flapping gently now, as if mocking me. I rushed outside, half expecting to see him clinging to the rail, but the deck was empty. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, but Claire, she wasn't there. I tore through the cabin, checking the bathroom, the closet, under the bed like an idiot. Nothing. My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat. Then, just as I was about to sprint out the door and scream for help, I saw it. On the dresser. Her bracelet. The one she never took off. Only it was sitting inside a folded napkin, neatly placed there like a gift. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside, written in the same careful handwriting I'd seen earlier on the room service menus, was a single line: "She dined with me." I didn't remember leaving the cabin. 1 second I was staring at that napkin, and the next I was pounding down the carpeted hallway barefoot, clutching Claire's bracelet so tight it cut into my palm. Every cabin door I passed looked the same, each one a silent witness refusing to help. I banged on the nearest door. A sleepy middle-aged man cracked it open. "What's the matter?" he asked groggily. "My friend. She's missing. Have you seen anyone in a black suit? Tall, pale, dark hair." The man's expression froze. His eyes darted to the floor, and without another word, he shut the door. The latch clicked. I moved on, knocking, begging, but everyone reacted the same way. They'd look startled at the description, then retreat like I'd cursed them. Some didn't even answer. By the time I made it to the elevator lobby, I was gasping for breath. A steward stood there, adjusting his tie, clipboard tucked under his arm. He smiled politely until I gave the description. Then the smile died. "You need to go back to your room," he said firmly. "What? No. My friend. She's gone. Someone took her." His voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "We don't talk about him." The doors opened behind him. He gave me one last look, a warning, before stepping inside. I didn't follow. My legs locked in place. My mind was reeling, trying to process what he had just said. "We don't talk about him. Who the hell was him?" I stumbled to the guest services desk, but the girl working there barely met my eyes. "Everything's fine, sir," she repeated over and over, like a script she'd been forced to memorize. When I slammed the bracelet and napkin on the counter, her face went white. She snatched them both away, sliding them out of sight like contraband. "I don't know where you got these," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but don't ever show them again. For your own safety." I grabbed her wrist before she could turn. "Tell me the truth." Her eyes darted to the cameras overhead. She leaned in. "He comes when the ship is at sea. He chooses who he wants. Once they accept, they don't come back." "Accept what?" My throat was dry. She swallowed hard. "His invitation." Before I could press further, a supervisor appeared from the back, his expression stiff and unfriendly. He pulled the girl aside, muttering something I couldn't hear. She didn't look back at me. Not once. I backed away, the reality hitting me like a tidal wave. Claire hadn't just disappeared. She'd been taken, chosen. And then it struck me. She'd mentioned earlier that she was craving dessert, the midnight dessert buffet. I ran. The hallway blurred as I pushed past confused passengers, my bare feet slapping against the polished floor. When I reached the dining level, my stomach dropped. The grand ballroom doors, the ones I hadn't even noticed before, were wide open. Music drifted out, soft and alluring, like violins echoing across water. Laughter, too, mingling with the clinking of glasses. I stepped inside. The room was beautiful. Chandeliers glowed golden, tables glittered with untouched desserts, glasses of champagne bubbled at every place setting. But the guests, they weren't right. Their movements were too smooth, their laughter too perfectly timed. It felt less like a party and more like a rehearsal. And at the center, standing behind a long banquet table, was the man in the suit. Claire sat beside him. Her head turned slowly as I entered, her face pale but her lips curved into a strange, dreamy smile. She raised a glass, her eyes glassy, and whispered, "He's been waiting for you." The sound of crystal glasses chiming filled the ballroom, but none of the guests were actually drinking. They just held their glasses high, frozen in a moment of celebration that never ended. Their eyes followed me as I stepped closer, hundreds of stares pinning me in place. The man in the suit didn't move until I was only a few feet away. When he finally raised his head, I realized his smile hadn't changed once since I first saw him. It was too wide, stretched unnaturally across his face, and his teeth were just slightly wrong. Too many of them, too sharp. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and deep, but it echoed like he was speaking into a cavern. "You've come for her." Claire turned her head toward me again. Her movements weren't natural anymore. They were slow, delayed, like someone pulling invisible strings. She whispered, It's beautiful here. Stay with us." I shook my head, my pulse hammering. "What do you want from us?" The man set his glass down gently. "It's not what I want. It's what the sea requires. Every voyage, it claims a few to keep balance. I simply extend the invitation. Some decline, most accept." "Invitation?" My voice cracked. He smiled wider. "A drink, a toast. A single sip is enough." She accepted. Claire's glass hovered at her lips. I lunged forward and slapped it away, but the moment it hit the floor, the entire room gasped in unison. The chandeliers flickered. The walls seemed to ripple, as though the water outside was pressing inward. The man in the suit leaned close, so close I could smell the salt on his breath. "You shouldn't have done that." The ballroom erupted. The guests rose, their laughter turning shrill, distorted. Their faces blurred, water pouring from their mouths and eyes. They moved toward me in perfect synchronization, dozens of drowned hands reaching out. I grabbed Claire's wrist and pulled, but she resisted, her body stiff. She whispered, almost pleading, "Don't fight it. He'll take us both." I didn't care. I dragged her toward the door, shoving through the crowd of dripping figures. Every touch burned cold, every grasp pulling me deeper into the nightmare. The chandeliers swung violently, showers of glass falling around us. We reached the threshold. I pulled Claire through and slammed straight into the guest services lobby. The ballroom was gone. Just white walls, fluorescent lights, and a desk where the girl from earlier stood, watching me silently. Claire was still at my side, but limp, her bracelet cutting into my palm. I spun back, but the ballroom doors weren't there anymore. Just blank wall. The girl's voice broke the silence. "You ran. No one ever runs," I shouted. "Where's the ballroom? Where is he?" She shook her head slowly. "If you saw him, it's already too late. You don't escape the invitation, you just delay it." Claire stirred, blinking up at me, confused. "What happened? Why are we here?" Relief flooded me. She didn't remember. She was safe. Or so I thought. Later that night, as I lay awake in the cabin, I heard the faint clink of glass. I turned my head. Claire was standing at the foot of the bed, her eyes glassy, her hand raised in a toast. Her lips moved, and though no sound came, I knew exactly what she was saying. "Cheers!" The glass slipped from her hand. But it didn't shatter. It dissolved, like water pouring back into the sea.